You know when somebody says something that you think is a joke, but then they keep saying it over and over and over again until eventually you realize they're not joking about that thing. They're serious. Today we're talking about the United States taking over Canada because welcome to 2025, I guess. Now, I know where the pushback is going to come from here. People are going to say, you can't take Trump seriously. This is just a negotiating tactic. Come on. He doesn't mean it. To which I would say, even if that is the case, there's still three things worth considering. First, in any negotiation, communication is, of course, important, communication being a two-way street. So if one side doesn't understand what the other side is saying, you want to rectify that issue, right? And I'll show you in today's video how time and again over the course of the last few months, rather than clarify that and say, guys, of course, we're not going to take over Canada, our great allies to the north, Trump, members of his administration, and supporters in the media have instead used that opportunity to double down and say, yeah, actually, it's a good idea. Here's why. It is 100% on the table. Doesn't seem like there's any misinterpretation happening there. The second piece, if we're being honest with ourselves, is that if this type of language came from any other country around the world, we would say that they were setting the stage for an invasion. Imagine China looking at Taiwan and talking about how they're trying to make them not a viable country. Or if Russia looked at Latvia and said, you know, actually a lot of citizens there would really like to be a part of Russia. We're thinking about moving them into the Russian Federation. We would say, we've seen this movie before. We know exactly what you're doing. You're setting the stage to some sort of takeover of another country. So I feel like it's at least worth bringing up when we're hearing that same language from our leaders here in the United States. And third, all of this, even if it is directed at some sort of future negotiations, we should mention that it's done some pretty significant work on U.S.-Canadian relationships already. I'll pull up some polls at the end of today's video to show you how much Canadian sentiment has turned against the United States in just the last couple weeks. That's something. We can't disregard that entirely. So whatever these negotiations lead to, a lot of damage has already been done. Now, starting out back when this was originally, or one of the first times this is brought up as just a joke, Trump put out a truth, not a tweet, but a truth over there, and said, it was a pleasure to have dinner the other night with Governor Justin Trudeau of the great state of Canada. I look forward to seeing the governor again so we may continue our in-depth talks on tariffs and trade. That's funny, right? Kind of trolling Canada. This was before Trump came into office. So after he was elected, before he came into office, kind of funny in a lot of ways, I think, right? Then Trump, and I should mention this, has addressed this a few more times, to include yesterday, and we're going to play those videos in a minute. But he did make a point of clarification in January then, when he was not ruling out military force against Greenland or the Panama Canal. But he said when it came to Canada, it would be economic force, which, I guess is a step in the right direction generally. But if, any force against any allies tends to be a bad thing in my view, but tomatoes. But shifting over to kind of the responses in media, and I feel like this is important because these are people not speaking on behalf of the president, but that definitely have the president's support. Starting out here with Jesse Waters on Fox News. This is a clip of a clip, and it has 2.8 million views. Let's go ahead and check this one out here.
I get it. You say that Americans don't have a problem with Canadians, and we don't. But it seems like you have a problem with us. Because if I were a citizen of another country and I was a neighbor of the United States, I would consider it a privilege to be taken over by the United States of America. That's what everybody else in the world wants, American citizenship. For some reason, that's repellent to you Canadians. And I find that personally offensive, Premier.
Now, it does look a little bit like Waters is trolling, right? And I think this is one of those things where you keep seeing this kind of trolling type language, and it's funny in a sense, but we have to step back and recognize that at what point is it not funny is maybe when the other side isn't getting the joke or isn't enjoying the joke anymore. We crossed that line a while ago. Canadian media, like well over a month ago, said, this is serious, you guys. He's not joking about this. We have to take this threat seriously. And just earlier this month, Tim Pool kind of added to all of that fervor, if you will, saying, quote, after we destroy the Canadian economy, their will to resist will erode. We will then march in unopposed to deliver Canada to its rightful place as a territory of the United States with no political representation. Again, kind of like trolling, right? Joking, I think, but in the broader context of how Canada is feeling about this, it's just kind of adding fuel to the fire. So much so that Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau, just a couple days ago, I feel like I said that weird, Trudeau, just a couple days ago was caught on a hot mic where he said after a speaking engagement, quote, Trump has it in mind that the easiest way to do this, talking about taking over Canada, is absorbing our country, and it's a real thing. In my conversations with them, and then it cut off. They said they're very aware of our resources, of what we have, and they very much want to be able to benefit from those. Now, conspiracy stuff here, are there ever really any hot mics, right? Or is this something that he wanted to get out there for the media to pick up? Who knows? But either way, it's not just Trudeau. It's multiple Canadian officials saying this is a real problem. We're not going to stand for this. Now, turning over to some responses from Trump and members of his administration here, just yesterday on Air Force One, actually traveling out to the Super Bowl, Trump addressed all of this himself. Again, with the idea of if there's a miscommunication here and Trudeau is overreacting and the Canadian people, they just don't get it. Now is the time for people like President Trump and his national security advisor and others to step in and say, guys, let me sort this one out for you. But instead, this is what we got.
Of Canada, if this should happen, I don't know how they can do it without us, because without the U.S., Canada really doesn't have a country. They do almost all of their business with us, and if we say we want our cars to be made in Detroit, with a stroke of a pen, I can do that. And other things in addition to that would not allow Canada to be a viable country.
Mr. President, you're going to honor first responders today.
So again, there's a lot of things at our disposal that we could do to make Canada not a viable country. Again, I want you to view that and the next couple clips in the context of what if an adversarial nation said that? So what if China looked at Taiwan and said, we're going to do what we can to make them not a viable country? You see how that's kind of laying the groundwork for some sort of hostile type takeover. So it's not crazy that Canada and others are probably taking this very, very seriously. Now let's stick with Trump here to the last statement I have from him, again coming out yesterday during his interview just before the Super Bowl.
You know, the Prime Minister said this weekend to a group of Canadian businessmen, he was at a private meeting, he said that your wish for Canada to be the 51st state is a, quote, real thing. Is it a real thing?
Yeah, it is. I think Canada would be much better off being a 51st state because we lose $200 billion a year with Canada, and I'm not going to let that happen. It's too much. Why are we paying $200 billion a year essentially in subsidy to Canada? Now, if they're a 51st state, I don't mind doing it.
You said the tariff is a beautiful...
So again, this was yesterday. We have February 9th, 2025. For all the comments of it's being taken out of context or it's not actually what he means, asked point blank, do you think Canada should be the 51st state? Yes. Right? Like, I don't. So, okay, so maybe it's the negotiation tactic is the direction we're going. But very clearly that's the direction that the president is taking it. Now, I haven't heard anything. I actually looked the other day for statements from the White House press secretary. Nothing really addressing this that I could find. Nothing from Secretary of State Marco Rubio addressing this really at all. He did meet with the Canadian foreign minister recently. It seems like mostly what they talked about was NATO and defense spending. Didn't see anything about annexation of Canada, for better or for worse. All right. But shifting over to National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, former Green Beret, former American soldier, or former U.S. Army service member. I don't know why I tripped over that. Let's get into this here. He gets asked the same question about Trump annexing Canada.
Canada, in a closed-door meeting with business leaders, outgoing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau warned that President Trump is serious about annexing Canada to make it the 51st state. Is he right? Is President Trump serious about planning to annex Canada?
Look, I think the Canadian people many of them would love to join the United States with no tariffs, with lower taxes. And I have all kinds of neighbors down in Florida that are Canadians that are escaping many of the liberal policies and have moved in. But look, what we're talking about
yes or no? First of all, I think some Canadians would disagree with you.
In the Western Hemisphere?
I think some Canadians would disagree with you. But just yes or no, is he planning to annex Canada?
Part of his policy. Well, I don't think there's any plans to invade Canada, if that's what you're talking about. But there is a lot of people that like what we have in the United States and do not like the last 10 years of liberal progressive governance in Trudeau. But really what you're seeing is a reassertion of American leadership in the Western Hemisphere, from the Arctic all the way down to the Panama Canal. And that's what we're talking about, from Greenland to Arctic security, to the Panama Canal coming back under the United States. America has avoided our own hemisphere, where we have the energy, the food, and the critical minerals for way too long. And you're seeing a reassertion of President Trump's leadership.
The New York Post has reported.
Okay, so an important piece here that we're going to get into is the whole idea. This is very similar to what we saw out of Russia when they went into Ukraine a couple different times, 2014 and then again in 2022, where they laid this out as, hey, we're just going in because the people there want us. And I think if we step back and we're being honest with ourselves, that can be a very dangerous game they were playing. So we just saw Waltz talk about how, hey, look, there's actually a lot of Canadians that would very much like to be Americans, and there could be a lot of benefits to being the 51st state. And that doesn't tend to line up with most polling. That's the challenge. So if we were to step back and saw, I don't know what the number would be, right? 65, 75, 85, 90 some percent of Canadians said, actually, yes, we're on board with this, I think it'd be a very different conversation, right? That's not the case right now. So shifting over here to some poll data, this and everything else will, of course, be linked in the description below. This one coming from YouGov, published on January 31st, where they found that in talking to Canadians, Canadian adults, 77% opposed becoming a part of the United States. 15% were in favor, 8% didn't know. So, like, we are nowhere near, like, even half of that country deciding that they would like to become a part of the U.S. Then turning over to an Ipsos poll here, talking about how Canadians are turning away from the United States amid these tariff concerns. This was just published on February 7th, so a couple days ago. 68% said that they think, 68% of Canadians in this poll said they think less of America as a country because of Donald Trump's threats against Canada. So, like, right now, already some pushback against the United States from who have traditionally been one of our closest allies around the world for a long time, the Canadians. Also, 66% say they're going to be avoiding traveling to the United States during the duration of the Trump presidency, and 67% will be avoiding buying U.S.-made goods. Like, who knows, right? These are just people's feelings that they're thrown out there in the middle of a poll. Will these things actually take place? Will they actually not buy U.S.-made goods? We'll see. The point that I'm trying to make with this is that there's been a direct impact already. We don't even know where these negotiations are going, but the relationship between the United States and Canada in a lot of ways has been frayed. And, you know, what's it going to take to get that back? I don't know, right? Sometimes we overplay things in the media and hype something up like it's going to be a big long-term deal, and it ends up really not being the case. Other times I feel like we miss the undercurrents and don't actually understand what's going on. That's what I'm nervous about in this case. Fortunately, we've got a couple American officials kind of downplaying the idea of a military invasion of Canada, which, if we've got any good news, I guess we're going to take it where we can. But there still is clearly a lot of interest with Trump and senior leaders of his administration, as well as his supporters in the media, to do something to make Canada the 51st state of the United States. And as of now, it doesn't look like that's something the Canadians are really on board with, but it's something we'll have to keep an eye on for sure. That's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.